Thank you. Thank you.
Just a little housekeeping, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Right, Mr. Connolly, first of all, your name, please. Full name.
Mr. John Joseph Connolly.
Mr. Connolly, you have made 2 witness statements for the inquiry. The first of them dated the 24th of July of last year, obviously. The second, apparently undated. They are respectively, Chair, in terms of the inquiry references, INQ 000124 and INQ 000120, and as usual I'll ask for those to be adduced in full, please.
Indeed, thank you.
Do you have your statements in front of you, Mr. Connolly?
I've got them just by my side here.
Right. I'm going to be referring to some of the paragraphs of them, so it would be as well for you to have them in front of you.
Excuse me.
And I want to ask you, thank you, that you'll find the first witness statement behind tab 1 and the second behind tab 2. So if you just keep that open, and I'll, as required, we'll take you to paragraphs of your witness statement. I'm beginning with the first witness statement at really your paragraph 3. Tell us the history of your employment with G4S, in particular Tinsley House and at Brook House, please.
Yes, I started work at Tinsley House in, I think, September, November 2006. I was employed as a detainee custody officer.
Yeah. Pausing there, and in 2006, was it for G4S or for another company?
Sorry, it's for GSL.
GSL. And in March 2009, if my memory serves me, they took over the contract, or had the contract. Is that right, for the immigration removal centres at
That's
Gatwick?
right, yeah. G4S put the tender
Yeah.
in.
So they effectively took it over. But you started work as long ago at Tinsley House as 2006.
That's correct.
As, remind us, what did you just say? As a
detainee custody officer.
So DCO, as we've come to shorten it. And did you work throughout that period just at Tinsley House, or did you flip between the two?
I worked predominantly then at Tinsley House.
Yeah. When did that change?
I think I moved to Brook House, I think it may have been 2011, 2012,
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
All right, but thereabouts. And at the third paragraph of your first witness statement, you say that in the last couple of lines, although all through I was only a DCO, when required I instructed the initial training courses for their initial control and restraint training. I also refreshed operational staff. When did you become an instructor?
I became an instructor, I think it was July 2010?
Yeah.
Was it 9?
Well, either 9 or 10.
2010, I think.
2010 you became an instructor. How did you become an instructor?
I applied for, I applied to my line manager at Tinsley House
Yeah.
to be a control and restraint instructor.
Yeah.
And then I didn't hear anything for 2 or 3 months probably.
Yeah.
They said I was successful, and I went to HMP Kidlington for initial assessment,
Yeah.
a day assessment. I had to give a PowerPoint presentation, and also I had to give a lesson of techniques on the mat.
Yeah. So you applied, you didn't hear for a bit. When you did hear, you were sent off to Kidlington, HMP, a prison. HMP, Her Majesty's Prison, was it?
No, it's,
Kidlington?
it's a college.
So
Well,
it's-
they call it a college. It was 2 aircraft hangars.
So it's part of the prison estate?
Yes,
or?
it was, yes.
I see. And you did an assessment,
Yes,
for which presumably you were successful.
I was, yes.
And when did you go on an instructor's course?
I went off.
Was it immediately after? I'm not going to, nobody's tying you down to dates,
No,
Mr. Connolly,
I'm-
but
I'm,
roughly.
right. Let me rewind. I went on the initial one-day assessment course, 2009.
Yeah, okay.
2010, I went on the 2-week instructor's course
Yeah.
at Kidlington. Sorry about that.
Okay. And presumably you had practical exercises, exams to take, and presumably you passed.
Yes,
And so thereafter, were you allowed to instruct others in control and restraint?
once I'd passed that 2-week course, yes.
Yeah. Did you need to have refreshers yourself?
Yes, every year we had to go to Kidlington
Yeah,
or HMP Doncaster
yeah.
to do a 4-day refresher course, and
So
that was a pass or fail.
Right. So if you failed, you were off the books,
Yeah.
and if you passed, you
Had another
continued
12.
training. And did you pass every year?
Yes,
Right. In the statement, the first statement you gave, if you look at your paragraph 2, under the heading Professional Qualifications, in brackets you have prison service. Before you started at Tinsley House, had you been in the prison service? Is that what
No.
you meant by that?
no, I think it was just highlighting the qualifications
All right.
underneath, that was all.
So if you don't mind me asking, before 2006, what was your occupation?
I worked in the Royal Society of Medicine in Wimpole Street,
Yeah,
front of house reception.
right. So this was a completely different career direction. And in 2006, one assumes you had, going in as a DCO, the sort of training we've heard about, the initial training course, the one you ended up instructing.
Yes,
So by the time you applied to become, and did become an instructor about 2010, you'd been at it for 4 years.
yes.
What do you think equipped you to become an instructor?
I was very good at the techniques. I was very good at talking to people, and actually standing back and directing people. I find that if you talk to people, you could talk to people for as long as you wanted, but eventually you come to an impasse, and that's where control and restraint unfortunately came in.
Right. And presumably, by the time you came to apply for and become an instructor, you yourself had been involved in control and restraint?
Tinsley House, probably about 2 or 3, that was it.
2 or 3 ever?
Yeah, ever.
So before you, so that we're clear, before you applied to become an instructor, you'd only had experience of control and restraint in practical terms 2 or 3 times.
Correct, yeah.
Once you were an instructor, did you ever become involved directly in control and restraint?
Yeah, I'd normally supervise,
Yeah.
so I'd be stood back, just watching,
So you'd never be hands-on,
unless it was absolutely necessary.
right? And how often do you think it became absolutely necessary?
My time at Brook House, probably 3 or 4.
So that would be, what, 2011 to the time you were dismissed in 2017, so
Correct,
over
yeah.
6 years, 3 or 4 times. And what were the sort of circumstances in which it became absolutely necessary for you not merely to supervise and be in the background, but actually become involved?
On one occasion, I think it was on E-Wing, we had to go in and remove a detainee from his cell. Unbeknown to us, nobody had switched off the electrics or the water, so the detainee had managed to boil hot water and add washing up liquid to it. So when the officers went in, one of the officers didn't have his collar down, so he got burnt, scalded, so had to pull him out and I had to jump in.
I see. So that's an example
Yeah.
of when it was necessary for you to be there. When you were supervising control and restraint, what did supervision mean to you?
Making sure that the officers were using the correct techniques,
Yeah.
and if they weren't, reminding them, and also looking out for the welfare of the detainee, medical emergencies.
So you would supervise in real time,
Yeah.
and after such a control and restraint, where things had gone wrong or the correct techniques weren't being used, did you ever take it upon yourself to debrief the officers afterwards?
What normally happened afterwards, we'd sit down and the officers would have a half an hour just to reflect,
Yeah,
gather thoughts, then they would write the report, which may have taken an hour,
yeah,
hour and a half.
yeah,
After that, all the reports were collated. I would read them, and if there was anything untoward, then yes, we would. If it was serious, then it would go to the Home Office. They had their own branch that would investigate
yeah.
control and restraint.
Is that the
If it
PSU?
wasn't, then it'd be lessons learnt. We'd take the whole team, show them the video footage if there was any footage,
Yeah,
show them the reports, and it'd sort of be a lessons learnt.
right. And the Home Office team, are you having in mind the professional standards unit?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we may come back to aspects of that. Still focusing on paragraph 2 of your first witness statement, you there set out some dates. You say January 2009 you were a Bronze Unit Commander in brackets Tornado. What did that mean?
The bronze commander for the Tornado units was 12 officers, and there was 2 commanders per 12 officer team. If an establishment had lost control of the establishment, then the Tornado teams would go in and claw back control of that establishment. But because we weren't PCOs, prison custody officers, we were detainee custody officers, we couldn't go into prisons, only G4S establishments.
Yeah.
So
So let's just understand that a bit. That these teams, of which you were one of 2, as I understand it, Bronze Unit Commanders, has this got anything to do with the Nationals, or is this something entirely different?
the Nationals trained,
Yeah,
and the Nationals would be in charge of the Tornadoes, because basically the governor would hand over control to the Nationals.
is that the governor of a prison?
Yes,
Right,
or the detention centre.
yeah. And are these what are known, or at least were known in 2017 as the National Tactical Response Group?
Correct.
The
yeah.
NTRG.
NTRG, yes.
Or the Nationals. Right. So I'm just trying to understand what this Tornado group was. Was it part of the Nationals, or was it outside the Nationals? Did it only operate in detention centres, or was it something else?
No, it was prison establishments and
Yeah.
detainee establishments.
Yeah,
The Nationals had overall. An officer first had to go and be qualified in control and restraint,
yeah.
and then he
Are we
would
talking about prison or detention?
both,
Both, right?
and then they would go to Kidlington
Yeah.
for a week's course.
You're talking about instructors?
No, the officers would go to Kidlington for a week's course.
Which officers?
The officers that applied to go for Tornado,
Right.
DCOs.
I see. So, let's just try and understand this, because I'm struggling with this at the moment.
Sorry.
A PCO within the prison estate or a DCO within the detention estate could, if they wished, apply to become an officer on one of those units?
Yes.
Right. So this has got nothing to do with the internal training that G4S provided
No.
in the detention estate. And if you went off to become one of these Tornado group members, what would your job be? when a control and restraint required you? What was it made you different to
Nothing.
the ordinary DCO or DCM
Oh.
inside the estate?
Um,
What was special about this tornado unit?
they learnt how to defend themselves against fire bombs, walking through petrol bombs. They were. It was more geared up towards the prisons
Yeah.
than it was detainee, but I think it was a contractual requirement
Yeah.
for Brook House and Tinsley House to have tornado units,
Right.
and that was from the Home Office.
Right. So, thinking about it, did forget the prison estate? Did Brook House, as far as you know, during the time you were there, from about 2011 onwards, did it have a tornado unit of officers?
Yes,
Right. Were you one of those officers?
yes,
Were you in charge of them?
yes.
And can you remember, or remind us, you mentioned a figure a little earlier, I think you said 2 units of 12 officers?
12 officers and 2 commanders.
12 officers, forgive me, and 2 commanders. Who was the other commander?
It was Simon Murrell, but he left,
Yeah.
so it was just me.
So, just you.
Yeah.
And the 12 officers, do you remember any of their names?
Yep, if you had Nathan Ward,
First names?
Steve,
Webb?
I think,
Skit?
second?
Steve Skit? Steve
No.
Webb? None of those. Steve Lawton?
Yes.
Right.
Cool. Sorry about this.
No, well, don't. I'm putting you on the spot, and
No,
it's,
no,
it's
no,
difficult.
I'm trying to think. Steve Law and Andy Lydon.
It's Lyden, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dave Aldis,
Aldis.
who was, she's left now, female officer. Oh dear.
Don't worry, Mr. Connolly, because otherwise this could
Yeah.
take some time. Well, we're getting an impression, but so this tornado unit you have in mind now, did they exist at the time you started at Brook House effectively full time? 2011.
Initially, when Brook House opened,
Yeah.
50 DCOs that had only done a week's CNR training
Yeah.
went up to Kidlington
Yeah.
to become tornado,
Yeah.
or the advanced, as they call it,
Right.
control and restraint.
All right. Let me ask you this: did this tornado unit still exist in 2017, or had it been disbanded?
Probably in name, I mean, there was only one commander, that was I. No, in fact, I packed up in 2015.
Yeah.
So the officers, I think it was a handful of officers, about 7 or 8, were still going up there to do their refresher.
Yeah.
But it was nonsensical. It was.
All right. So I think we've got some idea, I hope, of what you were referring to in your witness statements when you talked about that. Coming back to training, your instruction of officers on the ITC, the initial training course, and it was a week-long course, was it, control and restraint?
It was, yes.
Did you think that officers were sufficiently trained for what they were going to be confronted with? I'm not talking about your training, I'm talking about the training that was offered within a syllabus which was clearly provided to you. Did you think it was enough?
Yes, it was. I think it was about 40 hours, 38 hours, 40,
Yeah.
40 hours, yeah. Yes.
And do you think that enough emphasis and training was given to de-escalation rather than the use of force as a last resort?
Yes, day one was PowerPoint, and it was hammered home. De-escalate first if you could. If
Yeah.
you couldn't de-escalate, try and control it. If you couldn't diffuse it. If you couldn't diffuse it, try and control it.
Yeah.
So that was the mindset we tried to get people into. Talk first if you could, for as long as you could.
Yeah.
But eventually, as I said, you'd come to an impasse. And
Who was the examiner, as it were, for these individuals that passed through your hands during control and restraint training? Who examined them?
ourselves, the control and restraint instructors.
Well, I mean, who do you mean ourselves?
Well, there was myself, Michael Trott, Jack Bannister, Dave Killick, Dave Webb, and Steve Webb, should I say? Sorry, I
Yeah.
always get them mixed up. Steve
Yeah.
Webb.
Were they also instructors?
Yes.
So, like you, they were instructors. And was there ever a time, Mr. Connolly, when you felt an individual who had passed the training really ought not to have done?
No. Day 4 was our day on the training where we decided if an individual was not good enough to go onto the final day's exercise.
Yeah.
We had a guy called, I think he was mentioned on the Panorama programme.
Yeah, well, that's probably quite a few people, Mr. Connolly.
Anyway, this guy, we put him under pressure. He ripped his helmet off. He saw red, so we binned him, for want of a better word.
This was during training?
Yes.
And what do you mean, binned him?
We failed him on his control and restraint,
Okay,
and that was a pass or fail on the ITC.
yeah. So it wasn't a question of getting beyond a certain pass mark, was it?
No.
Do you think, looking back now, that the nature of the training that you were instructed to give new recruits and the refresher training was too geared towards the prison estate rather than the detention estate? In other words, you were dealing with different issues, different types of people, and different reasons for them being held in detention rather than prisoners who were either on remand or convicted. Did you think, or did it ever strike you that perhaps the CNR training for the detention estate was just not bespoke enough for the detention population?
Looking back, probably yes. When they brought this new package in called MMPR, Managing and Minimising Physical Restraint, that was a whole new world opened up for how we dealt with detainees.
Yeah.
The holds were, I wouldn't call them soft, but the holds were a lot user friendly
Yeah.
towards the detainees, whereas we didn't have that tool or package in the control and restraint world.
Yeah. Well, so when did MMPR come into use? It's something that you will actually see mentioned as a sort of legend on the use of force forms, the DCF2. And if my memory serves me, I certainly asked Callum Tully when he gave evidence whether he'd had any MMPR training, and I'm not sure he knew what I was talking about. First of all, what's the difference between MMPR and traditional control and restraint?
Control and restraint, I think it came into being in the 90s after
Yeah.
Strange Ways,
Yeah,
and it was geared solely to go in, get hold of an individual
yeah,
and restrain him.
yeah,
MMPR, they realised that you couldn't keep someone in holds or restrain them for that length of time without going into a medical emergency, and also you couldn't de-escalate that situation if a person was being held against the will.
yeah. So when did MMPR become a thing?
I think 2015 or 16,
Yeah.
we tagged MMPR onto refresher training for the staff.
So, pausing there, if you were a new recruit in 2016, by way of example, would you be trained in MMPR, CNR, or both?
Both, but I can't actually remember the date.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. It was when we went up to
Don't worry.
Kidlington on one of our refresher training. They slowly
Worked it in.
worked it into the
All right.
syllabus.
But if you've been trained under the regime before MMPR, you only got MMPR when you went on a refresher course. Is that what you're
Yes.
telling us?
Yes. Yeah. It was,
And if you had to put your finger on the fundamental difference between the two, what would you say it was?
there's probably a difference between driving a Mini or a Rolls Royce.
Yeah, which was which?
Mini being the CNR,
Yeah,
MMPR being the Rolls Royce.
yeah. Do you think it made a substantial difference?
Oh yes.
In what way?
The way you escorted a person from one location in the centre to another, it was totally different. It was a softer approach. It was a calmer approach.
Yeah,
It was a lot better for the detainees, a lot better for the officers.
yeah. Do you think, looking back, that those officers who had been trained and refresher trained, especially some of the older corps cohorts who'd been around, you know, from 2009 onwards, who were suddenly trained on refresher courses to MMPR, do you think, could you spot that they were actually handling things differently once they got MMPR training after years of ordinary classical CNR?
Yeah, there was a lot of from the older guys. There was a lot of sort of apprehension
Yeah.
about the MMPR.
Apprehension or resistance?
I don't know. Some of them might have thought we were going a bit soft.
Yeah.
However, we weren't. It was once they got training and once they got used to it, a lot of them went, you know what? That's, yeah.
So, from your perspective, Mr. Connolly, do you think it made a difference? First, as far as the officers were concerned who were trained in it, how they approached CNR? That's question one. And question two, if so, did it make a difference to the welfare and care of detainees upon whom CNR was used?
First question. It focused the mind of the officers. It gave them a whole new outlook on how we dealt with
Yeah.
detainees, and the detainees. Once you use force on a detainee, we used to leave them for 24 hours, and then myself or another instructor with the DCM would go in, and we'd ask the detainee why he thought force was used on him.
Yeah.
Did he think it was appropriate? And then we tell him why the force was used. So we'd
That's
have a
MMPR.
conversation about it.
That's MMPR, is it?
Yeah, that was brought in
I see. So that's
as
what
a
it's
separate
around.
package.
Thinking about Callum Tully, I thought I'd asked him the question in phase one. It may well be it was a response in his inquiry statement to a question about MMPR where he said he didn't know what it was, but it doesn't really matter. Now, Callum Tully is somebody who came into Brook House in 2015 and he left in July 2017. Ought he to have known, given those dates, what MMPR was?
Certainly. He'd have had a refresher, and
Yeah.
he would have been refreshed on MMPR.
Yeah.
I think on the use of force forms, it was, did you employ MMPR, did you employ CNR?
Yeah.
So it was a joint box, people.
Yes. You talk about when you became an instructor, you were a local control and restraint instructor. What local to what? What did that mean? Local to Brook House or local?
Yeah, local to Brook House. The Nationals called anybody that wasn't a national
Yeah.
a local
see.
instructor, so you could be H&P Wandsworth or wherever.
And the training that you had, who was it delivered by?
I'm trying to think of his name now.
Not name. Let me ask you it this way: was it people who'd worked within the prison service?
Yes.
Yeah. And high-level instructors, presumably.
Yes, yeah.
So do you think there's a risk, given what I was asking you earlier about the transposition between prison service and the detention estate and the kind of training that was delivered, do you think there was a risk, maybe unintended, that people trained within a sort of prison service syllabus and program imported inevitably prison service ideology into the detention estates where CNR is concerned?
No, I don't think so, because we were sort of divorced from the prison service. You know, we'd done that training, and then we employed that training to either Brook or Tinsley House, and we tailored that to.
Yeah.
I mean, for instance, we couldn't carry handcuffs, so if we were on a restraint, and you had to restrain the detainee.
Yeah.
Nobody was there at the time to apply handcuffs to de-escalate the situation quickly. You had to call for a manager.
Right.
So
what? Nobody carried handcuffs.
No.
So when we see, and we see often, handcuffs being applied, where would those handcuffs have come from?
but if that was on a planned
Yeah.
operation, then the handcuff officer would have the handcuffs down then, because then you could apply the handcuffs
Yeah.
and start to de-escalate the situation.
But if it was an unplanned,
No,
nobody had handcuffs.
apart from the duty DCM.
All right. Let me ask you something that Nathan Ward said to the inquiry when he gave evidence. I'll put this up on screen. It's something in his first witness statement. Chair, it's tab 27 of the bundle.
Thank you.
It's DL 0000141 at page 81. You'll see. Don't worry about that, Mr. Connolly. You'll see it go up on screen. You'll see it go up on screen. Page 81. And you'll see at the bottom, and saying thank you, under the heading Control and Restraint, Training and Attitudes. And you told us Nathan Ward was one of your tornadoes. Paragraph 230, Control and Restraint techniques for custodial environments have been taught nationally as early as the late 60s in an attempt to bring a standardised approach to managing incidents in prisons. The National Tactical Response Group, the NTRG, who deal with the most violent and dangerous incidents nationally, are the team who now develop and deliver the CNR methods and training. The NTRG were born out of a hostage incident in Peterhead Prison in October 1987, where a 56-year-old officer was taken hostage. The government didn't have a suitable operational response within the prison service, and so had to deploy members of the UK Special Forces to resolve the incident. Following this, the prison service developed the NTRG. From its inception, CNR instructors were an elite team within the prison service who were extremely fit and able to dominate the most violent of circumstances, intentionally or not. This is the environment in which local CNR instructors are taught at the national training centres. The local instructors then deliver the training within their own establishments and try and replicate their own national experience, in inverted commas, which is expressed as a toxic masculine culture, which I witnessed filter down to G4S staff. And the methods they would, probably missing a word, use to carry out force and CNR in practice, and which is evident in Panorama. And he adds, during my own time being trained by the NTRG as a use of force instructor, people used to reminisce about NTRG trainers who boasted about their method of sleeping with females on the course by being harsh to them at the start of the week and then be kind at the end, and ending the course with heavy drinking on the penultimate night. As a teetotaler, I didn't partake in social events which involved heavy drinking. The toxic masculine culture which filtered down to G4S was evident. I witnessed staff being trained in degrading ways, such as forcing them to dress up in boiler suits and helmets to do warm-ups with press-ups if they made mistakes. I complained about the CNR training to Wayne Debnam and Ben Saunders at the time, as I felt it was inappropriate, humiliating, set the wrong culture for the centre. They stopped the warm-up practices for a certain period of time. I complained about the CNR training more than anything, as I saw it as being central to the running of Brook House, which to my mind was wrong and perpetuated a negative, macho-aggressive culture. Over the page, please. 233. Another issue I had with CNR was the emotional responses I witnessed from certain officers. In 1988, the Prison Service undertook some research into the effectiveness of their relatively new CNR techniques. The research noted that, quote, responses indicated that engaging in the use of CNR techniques is an emotional experience for officers. Their stated feelings generally tend to be at either end of an emotional scale, either elated or great or confident or nervous or worried or anxious, end quote. This range of emotional experiences can be seen in the Panorama documentary, in which reflect my own experience of observing staff, some of whom would present themselves as victorious. During my time at Brook House, I witnessed the visible adrenaline of certain staff who would regularly engage in CNR following the restraint. They seemingly enjoyed the adrenaline rush, and it was reflective of the alpha male attitude. There are clear examples of it recorded in the Panorama documentary, with officers boasting about the use of force. A stark example, Jan Pashali, who boasts, after apparently strangling D1527, that we don't cringe at breaking bones. If I killed a man, I wouldn't be bothered, I'd carry on. And whilst this may be shocking, from my experience, it's a reflection of the methods and ethos of C&R. And I'm not going to read the rest, but he continues under that heading with his views about it. Quite a lot there, Mr. Connolly, but do you think it represented the CNR type of training which filtered down to GA4S was toxic masculine in the way that he says?
No. Our PowerPoint presentation on the use of law, we tailored that to specifically for detention centres. As I said, the training, we debriefed each student after every day's training to highlight points. If we thought a student was going to go over the top, lose his rag, then that student would be binned straight away. No messing about.
Right.
I don't think Nathan Ward did control and restraint. He was he taught use of force for young adults between 12 and 17. I think there was that was Yarlswood, or not Yarlswood, Medway, YY Medway.
No. So you're saying you don't recognise any of what he says here? I mean, I know there's a lot, but he says, you know, the effect of importing this culture from the prison estates leads to a toxic masculine culture which filters down through the training to G4S staff.
I don't know where he gets that it was imported, because none of us were prison officers.
No.
We never worked in a
No, but
prison.
you're being trained by high-level instructors from the prison
yes, but
service.
those officers, again, like our, I think towards the end, 2015, we videoed all our training week from day 1 to day 5.
Yeah.
The prisons on our training did that as well.
Yeah.
It was all video, so any inappropriate behaviour or language would have been highlighted on the video. So no, I don't.
You don't accept any of this? All right. I'm going to ask you about another document now, just to try and move on, Mr. Connolly. Chair for you, tab 30, SXP 000133. It was a report, as we'll see in a second, by John Collier for Sussex Police, who were investigating certain features that were shown in the Panorama documentary. This is the 6th of February 2018. Go to page 3. You'll see at paragraph 9, he's talking about training. And one of the things he says is a medical DVD is shown to all staff prior to all use of force training. It covers principles of safe restraint, medical complications of restraint, mechanics of breathing, restraint asphyxia, medical conditions and risk factors, medical emergencies. Of particular note is the advice restraint asphyxia can result from any restraint position where there is obstruction of the airway or where movement of the rib cage or abdomen is limited. Anything that holds the mouth closed or compresses the neck is potentially dangerous. Never hold a prisoner around the neck, which of course is an important instruction when we consider events on the 25th of April. Do you recognise the medical DVD Mr. Colley is talking about?
I do, yes, and that came into play when the MMPR came in.
Right, so we're talking about 2015.
Something like that, yes.
Yeah. Mr. Collier's list of what the training covers doesn't include, will you agree, vulnerabilities relating to mental illness, self-harm or trauma?
No, it doesn't. No.
No. Do you think it should?
Yeah, I think it should, yeah. Because Brook House, we had a lot of vulnerable detainees that did have mental health issues.
Yeah, quite a lot of them. Is that list complete as far as you can recall? It covers principles of safe restraint,
Yeah,
medical complications,
yeah.
etc.
Yes, yeah, as far as I can recall, yes. I think it was a 30 or 40-minute DVD.
Yeah. And insofar as the training is concerned, who is the medical DVD delivered by? And in other words, who presents the medical DVD?
We did.
You. So, not a doctor,
No.
no one medically trained,
No.
no one in emergency medicine or anything like that?
No.
Certainly no psychiatrist or psychologist?
No.
No. Should it?
Hindsight, probably, if it had one of the nurses there, but then again, I don't know how qualified they would have been to
Yeah.
have actually given that.
One of the points, Mr. Connolly, that may not have struck you, but it's a question we've asked other officers, is how were they able to spot the difference between a mentally ill detainee and a detainee who was simply disruptive?
Couldn't.
No. Not without a level of training or assistance.
Yeah.
And even then it might be difficult, but
It would be
at least it would be a start.
yeah.
Yeah. Insofar as the training you gave locally, so the training you gave at Brook House, was there any oversight or any quality assurance to what you were doing? In other words, did anybody sit in from time to time, or did anybody ask you to provide them with a package of what training you were giving those officers, or were you simply left to your own devices?
No, we had a set format. We had safe systems of work. We had a raft of package. Each detainee had its own little mini. Each officer had his own little mini folder,
Yeah.
and we would annotate the training they did, how they got on. So it was a tick box there.
Sort of feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as well, like if an inquiry or anything like this, we could produce that form. They could say, "What did he? Was he trained in handcuffs? Yes, on this date.
Yeah.
Was he trained in restraint? Yes, this date."
But that's fine, so far as it goes. But was your training ever, as it were, inspected? Did anybody come along, sit down and watch John Connolly give the training?
Yeah, I think when the senior management got bored with sitting in their office.
Yeah, but that's informal because perhaps they just wanted a bit of light relief.
Yeah, that was it.
But I'm talking about more formal.
No.
By anybody who knew what they were doing. Say from somebody from Kidlington or one of the higher level instructors come down from Kidlington and watch John Connolly give the instruction that they had instructed you in.
We did have, apparently we did have a national instructor allocated for the centres at Kidlington.
You say apparently.
We never saw them.
Yeah.
They should have, come down just to see the training room, check our records.
Well, that's another issue. The facilities, for example. Were there facilities, for practical exercises?
Yes.
Yeah. We have been told there was a special room, I think, at Brook House where the control and restraint training was given.
It was half of the changing room
Yeah,
had been boarded and matted out, and we spent £6,000 on a foam cell that you could pull the walls down, you could make it how
Yeah.
you wanted.
I see. Yeah. Do you think the training facilities were adequate?
Yes, because we argued that the maximum we could ever have in that room was 15,
Yeah.
because we worked it out as 6 metres or 2 metres square
Yeah,
per 3 officers.
yeah,
Well, one officer when he was on the floor and practising. So we deemed that 15 was the maximum we could use in that room. Sometimes senior management tried to put pressure on us because there was too many on the course, on the initial course. So we just said you have to split the course because we're not budging on the 15 that we...
right. Two things. The room that you're talking about with a number of officers, are you talking about the little cell type room that was created, padded, or are you talking about the overall training facility?
Talking about the overall
Right.
training matted area, I
Yeah.
would say it was...
Looking at this room?
looking at this room from, say, from where that lady sat there
So from behind the transcriber, yeah.
to that wall, and probably down to those row of gentlemen there,
Right,
probably there.
yeah. I think I know which gentleman you're referring to, but...
Sorry.
No, it's all right. Don't worry, there are some gentlemen there anyway. But thank you, Mr. Connolly. So we have an idea of the size of the room. What was the pressure that management put on you?
They would have liked every officer to have passed the control and restraint.
What does that mean? What do you mean they would like every officer to have passed it? What does that mean?
If we thought we had a borderline case,
Yeah.
we'd raise that with the training manager
Who was the training manager?
at the time. Was it Michelle Brown? I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
Right, Michelle Brown.
And we'd leave it with them. But if a person was not dangerous but they hadn't picked up the techniques, we recommend that they would pass that ITC. They would have no detainee contact until they took another week's control and restraint training.
Right.
So that means they'd either work in visits or the gatehouse,
Yeah.
but they'd have no contact with detainees.
Right. But what was the particular pressure that management exerted? What was, I don't understand the pressure that you're talking about. What did G4S want that they didn't always achieve in terms of training individuals?
They wanted bums on the shop floor.
So
Excuse my language.
what, the people that they'd recruited, they wanted to be able to do the job?
Yeah, because there was never enough officers on the shop floor.
Right, so it was an understaffing issue. Yeah. And did that mean they wanted those officers? I mean, let me think about it another way. If they didn't get through their control and restraint part of the course, but they passed everything else, could they become DCOs?
They could, but they wouldn't. They couldn't actually have detainee contact.
Right, so that was a complete waste of time. They
Yeah.
couldn't go on the residential wings,
No,
and they couldn't certainly go on E-wing.
no,
Right. So they couldn't do much else, work in
No.
reception perhaps,
that's it.
and that's it. So G4S were investing in people, and if the people that they invested in couldn't do the job, and if they couldn't do the job because they didn't get through a critical part of the course, it was a wasted resource.
Yeah.
Right. Did that pressure ever translate into you or anybody else passing people who should not have been passed?
No.
What was the attrition rate, do you think, of officers who you had to bin as a percentage,
In my time as an instructor,
roughly?
2, 3 probably at most.
2, 3 people
Yeah,
per what? Per year, per month, per what?
that was it.
Per course? What are you talking about? Ever?
Probably when I started training between 2010 and 2017 when I left, 7 years, probably about 3 people.
And
that I know myself personally.
And do you think, this is a really difficult question, Mr. Connolly, and I realise that in asking it, but do you think you were ever, as it were, subconsciously biased to putting people through because of the pressure the company put on you?
No,
Never.
never.
Okay. So as far as you're concerned, you retained your objectivity throughout,
Yes,
and you never passed somebody, even if they were borderline, rather than fail them.
no, never.
In your witness statement, you also talk about a post you took up in 2012 as a coordinator. Did you remember talking about being a coordinator, a control and restraint coordinator?
Yeah, Wayne Debenham, who was head of health and safety and security at the time,
Yeah.
approached me down at Tinsley House.
Well-
Said, would I be interested in going for the job of coordinator?
Right, pause there. In your statement, your first statement, it's right at the foot of the first page, but it's part of paragraph 3. In 2012, I relocated to Brook House and took up the post of control and restraint coordinator. So you told us a little earlier it was 2011, but
Yeah,
nobody's...
sorry about that.
No, don't worry. Nobody's going to bother over much about that. But what you say is, took up the post of control and restraint coordinator of all use of force incidents that occurred at either Tinsley House or Brook House. I investigated and reported my findings to the Director of Gatwick IRCs and, if needed, to the Prison Service or the Professional Standards Unit, the PSU. I was also instrumental in the introduction of body-worn cameras for both operational officers and healthcare staff at both sites. What was the job of being a coordinator? I mean, maybe that gives us a few clues, but what was the job?
I had to ensure that officers were in ticket, as it were. They had their refreshers every year for...
Yeah.
I liaised with the training manager to sort out the control and restraint instructors
Yeah.
For refreshers or the ITC. Any use of force report landed on my desk. I read it, wrote a report about it, and handed that to Ben Saunders or Steve Skitz via Wayne Debenham, who was my direct boss.
And so was that routine? First of all, did you see every single use of force report?
Yes,
And did you write a report on every use of force report to
Yes.
your senior?
yes.
And what was the purpose of your report to Mr. Saunders?
To ensure that the use of force, or the officers that were using the use of force, were using the correct techniques.
Right.
The use of force was lawful in the first instance. Was it proportionate to the circumstances? Yeah.
And presumably in some cases you said everything's fine, and in other cases you said not so fine.
Yeah.
Did that involve you also looking at any available CCTV or body-worn or handheld camera footage?
If it was, yes. If footage was there.
Yeah.
Back in 2013, a guy called Dave, I can't remember the guy's name. It was in the reception area,
Yeah.
and he initiated the use of force on the detainee, which was totally unacceptable.
Yeah.
And I put that in the report, handed it to Ben Saunders, and that guy lost his job.
And so if you had provided a negative report on an individual or individuals involved in any use of force, and it went up to Ben Saunders, did he have a range of options available to him?
Not really. The only option he could have was, if it was a bad one, or it didn't look so good, then the only option he had was go to the what's it called again? PSU.
Right. And so, well, he had the option presumably of sacking someone, if it amounted to a sufficient level of misconduct, presumably.
But
When would he send it up to the PSU?
the thing about that is Ben Saunders, again, was he was an instructor at Medway
Yeah,
on the young offenders between 12 and 17.
yeah,
I think he took his CNR initial course
yeah,
2016 or something like that.
yeah,
So, although he knew the law,
yeah,
he didn't know the techniques.
right.
So he couldn't really
So he couldn't
comment on a...
I see. So if there was an issue about a technique that was used and you had said this technique should not have been used, rather than adjudicate it upon himself, he would send it up to the PSU, would he, to adjudicate on the control and restraint used in a particular incident? Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah, because if it was that serious, then the director couldn't have dealt with it.
Yeah.
It would have to go Home Office way.
All right. In your second witness statement, at paragraph 23,
Pages. Here we go.
23A, you say that when the position of CNR coordinator was made redundant, and you're talking here about reviews, they were conducted by a DCM who was also a CNR instructor. You weren't a DCM, so I wouldn't have taken part in reviews. First of all, the reviews are the reviews you're talking about. Are these the reviews you've been telling us about?
Yes.
That you were doing while you were a coordinator? We've seen, for example, documents written out by Steve Webb,
Yep.
which call themselves review meetings, use of force review meetings. Were there meetings ever?
The use of force review meetings.
They're sort of tick box type documents.
I think he's talking about when force had been used
Yeah.
on the detainee.
Yeah,
Then I think I'm not sure because I
yeah,
wasn't. I think that was the ones where they actually sat down with the detainee and
yeah.
chatted to him.
That's what you think. Okay. As far as you're concerned, though, the review exercise you did was just you by yourself. Wasn't a meeting with anyone, or did you have meetings with detainees as well?
I think towards the end of my tenure as control and restraint coordinator,
Yeah,
I did go in with the DCM
yeah,
and chat to detainees
Yeah.
that had force used on them.
yeah. When was the coordinator position stopped? You say you were made it in 2012.
15, 16.
Why was that? Why
They needed money to fund the AC/DC coordinator's role.
Right.
So it was like, well, we don't need a coordinator now, but we do need an AC/DC coordinator, which I could understand.
What's an AC/DC coordinator?
It was self-harm and the welfare of detainees.
Right. So they weren't prepared to have both
No,
coordinators, so your job went. You weren't a DCM, so you couldn't take it over. So what, you just went back to local instructor?
it just got farmed out to all the other CNI instructors in the centre.
Yeah,
But all of them were DCMs apart from me.
yeah. And as I just read, you say you were instrumental in bringing bodyboard cameras into the centre, yeah? In your experience, were they used appropriately?
Yes, they were.
Were they always switched on, always activated when they should have been?
If there was, say it was a first response where an officer who had a body-worn camera was notified that there was an incident going on, then his first job would be to switch the camera on as he was going,
Yeah,
so he could give a running commentary as to the lead up to the restraint. Yeah. They're always on if there was
Yeah.
an incident.
One question about the nationals. Who was responsible for calling them in
For
to take over? Who was responsible for it?
what if there was an incident, you mean?
Yeah, yeah,
If there was an incident, then I think the control room would call the duty manager, even if it was at home,
yeah,
or the director if it was daytime, and then the director would obviously view the situation, and if he warranted it, if we couldn't take control of the area inside
Yeah.
the detention centre, then he would make the call and call the nationals.
right. Tell me this, did you feel, and I'm going to jump from topic to topic now, try and get through your evidence this afternoon. One of the complaints we've heard from more than one witness is that the same people were always used for CNR. Do you recognise that? Others, some people just didn't want to do it, and therefore the same people got called upon the whole time.
Right, the DCMs, or the duty DCM, the Oscar one, if you want to call them, if there was an incident, they, rightly or wrongly, would pick who they decided was the best person for the job.
Right.
Now, I had a database when I was control and restraint coordinator. I took upon myself to make a database to see how many people were actually doing control and restraint, how many people weren't. And there was a pattern of certain officers
Yeah.
were picked. And chatting to them quietly, some of them were a bit miffed. that
Miffed at.
They were being picked
Yeah.
all the time. Some of them, absolutely, I'll be honest, some of them absolutely loved it. I don't know why, but some of them absolutely.
Who? Think about who absolutely loved it.
Darren Lunn, Lunn. He was down E-wing.
Yeah. Who else?
There's a guy called Sean Nichols.
Yeah. Who else?
God. Who else? Tom, can't remember his name.
Let me ask you some names, and I'm not going to suggest whether they did or they didn't, but I just want your help. Jan Pashali, do you remember training him?
Yes,
Was he a lover or hater of it?
he was a lover.
Yeah. Derek Murphy, was he a lover or a hater of it? Did you train him?
I did train Derek, yes. I don't say he was a lover, but yeah, he if asked, he'd do it.
Yeah. Did either of them complain to you, why am I always being picked?
Not to me, no,
Yeah.
personally.
Did you know whether either of them complained to anybody else? Do you know from
No.
your own experience?
I don't know,
No.
sorry.
In your first witness statement, if you care to look at that, paragraph 8. And 9, but really 9 at the top of, I think it's your page 15.
Yeah.
You say during the above period, and the period you were dealing with there was December 2016 to March 2017. During the above period, relationships between staff and detainees were at breaking point. Officers were having to deal with more and more medical emergencies on their own as the medical team were elsewhere dealing with another emergency. Drug taking was off the scale. Rumours started to circulate that someone working at Brook House was bringing in spice. I don't know if anyone was caught. Also, spice was being intercepted. on a regular basis in reception and through the visits. Did that mean if healthcare were taken off elsewhere that officers with no medical training were actually being asked to deputise for healthcare staff?
They weren't being asked, they had to. It was a case of,
Yeah.
it was there, it was in front of you. You had to deal with it.
Yeah. And clearly the custodial staff didn't have clinical training or the expertise. Stands to reason.
Basic first aid, that was
Yeah.
it.
Custodial staff being asked to respond to serious self-harm incidents alone with no informed medical input. Yes? And given these demands, particularly during the period you mentioned in your statement, did staff either become resentful or even complacent in respect of responding to self-harm incidents? In other words, did it become so same old, that they lost all perspective of what they were dealing with?
I think it was more frustration
Yeah?
at the time, frustration and anger that it was happening so often, so frequently that it was just, yeah.
Was there, from your experience there, Mr. Connolly, a culture of disbelief among staff in the sense that the default position was detainees were attention-seeking and manipulative rather than in distress?
No. As I said, it was when the spice hit a certain level inside the centre, it was an absolute crazy environment to work in. It was, yeah. You couldn't actually describe it unless you were there. It was, yeah. Officers were so on edge.
In your second witness statement, which is what we had open, if you go please to paragraph 24C on page 7, 24C on page 7, your second statement, you say that no officer you worked with broke the detention centre rules. However, some did turn a blind eye. What did you mean by that? What did they turn a blind eye to?
Right. When Brook House first opened, detainees could go into any wing they wanted, free movement. So there was a lot of thieving going on, a lot of, say, taking of other people's belongings.
Yeah.
So to stop that, ID cards were issued.
Yeah.
So if an officer was sat next to the door, so if a detainee wanted to leave the wing, he had to produce his ID card.
Yeah.
Some detainees would go, I haven't got my ID gov. An officer would go, okay, out you go. So you do whatever, go to the gym, go to the shop.
Yeah.
Meantime, that officer would be replaced by another officer. So the detainee comes back, knocks on the door. The officer says, have you got your ID card? No, it's in my room, gov. You can't come in. I want to come in. So then there'd be an altercation at the door because the first officer, as I said, turned a blind eye to the rules.
Yeah.
That's the rules I meant.
Any other blind eyes being turned to any other facets of life in Brook House?
Smoking in the recreational areas. You know, detainees would be smoking. It was a rule you could only smoke in your rooms because it was a non-smoking building. So officers would walk past, detainees would be smoking.
Yeah.
Another officer would come past. Can you put that out?
Why do you think it was that officers turned a blind eye? Was it for an easy life, or because they just didn't have the resource to deal with it, or what?
It was the difference between flipping burgers in McDonald's one day and then being into a pressure environment the next day. You know, you just couldn't. The training was okay, but I don't think it was. I don't know.
What training are you talking about?
The initial training.
Yeah, not your part of the course.
No.
Overall.
I mean, when I first turned up at Brook House, before we even started the training course, they showed us around the establishment, and I think 2 or 3 people that were on our course saw what they were walking into and went, bye, not for me.
Why? Because it looked like a prison.
Yeah, and the way the people were treated, I suppose. But then the Home Office, I think it was Debbie Weston, put a stop to that for some reason.
Put a stop to what?
Show rounds
Right.
before they actually went on the initial training course.
Why? Because it was too much of an eye-opener, or you don't know?
Don't know,
You
above
don't
my
know.
pay grade.
Tell me this before I'm going to ask the chair to break. One last topic, and then we'll come to some other topics, please, in the time that we have available this afternoon. What do you think your attitude was to detainees, in general terms?
Always fair.
Yeah.
I never used bad language or derogatory language in front of a detainee. However, when us guys were on our own, we did have banter, and I'll freely admit that.
Yeah.
But always try to be professional.
Yeah. Trouble with banter, even when you're with the other guys alone out of the hearing, or you hope out of the hearing of detainees, do you agree it leads to a culture where everybody thinks this is the norm, and then they forget themselves in front of detainees? I mean, people can't discipline themselves, can they?
It could have done, yeah.
Yeah. But one aspect I do want to ask you about before, as I say, I invite the chair for our 15-minute afternoon break. Chair, tab 18, can we put up on screen, please, SXP 000120 at page 8. Statement that Callum Tully gave to the police. Did you know Callum Tully?
I did, yes.
Yeah, and you worked with him.
Briefly, yeah, when I
Yeah.
was on activities.
Yeah. Right at the top of the page here, although your last name is misspelt, John Connolly on a number of occasions has shown complete contempt and hatred towards detainees. About 3 shifts before I went undercover, Connolly ordered the strip search of a detainee for no real reason. He said, "Take his fucking clothes off." The detainee was stripped of his clothing as DCOs stood around laughing at him. He was shown no dignity. John Connolly referred to him as a cunt. Verbal abuse towards detainees was commonplace in Brook House. What do you say about that?
It didn't happen, and can I explain why?
Yeah?
Okay, so to strip search a detainee, there's certain trigger points.
Yeah?
They've either been involved with a fight in another detainee,
Yeah?
they've either assaulted an officer, they've either damaged property, or they've got drugs on them. So to get a strip search, you'd have to go to the DCM. The DCM would have to go to the Home Office and authorise a strip search. So could I walk onto a wing and say, right, I need you to come with me, an officer, walk onto another wing, I need you. So I'll get 3 officers off a wing that's already short. Control room would see that, DCM would see that. I then grab a detainee, and the place is in lockdown. I order the officers to restrain that detainee. I'm assaulting him, because that's what restraint is. So the other detainees would have the perfect right to jump in and pull us off.
Yeah.
So how would I get a detainee from there to E-wing, strip him? It wouldn't happen.
Well, he's not talking about E-wing, is he?
Well,
He's-
any wing then. All right. How could I walk a detainee in locks through a wing full of 90 other detainees, and they
Yeah.
would just go, yeah, it's okay, boss, you carry on.
Yeah. Well, to be fair to you, he doesn't give more detail than we see in these 5 lines. But you are saying, Mr. Connolly, there was no occasion when, whether you had the permission of a DCM or not, whether circumstantially anything like this could have happened. You are saying there was never an occasion when you said, in respect of a detainee, to take his fucking clothes off. Never said that, or
Never.
words like that.
Never.
Never strip search an individual with other DCOs laughing.
No,
No.
never.
What about what he says John Connolly on a number of occasions has shown complete contempt and hatred towards detainees?
No.
You don't accept that?
No, I don't.
All right. Well, Chair, it's almost 3:30. I'll ask the Chair to take a quarter of an hour break. Back at 1:45, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Connolly.
Thank you.
All rise.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Can we put up on screen, please, TRN 0000085? Please, Chair 26, tab 26.
Thank you.
Mr. Connolly, I'm going to ask you about certain things you said on the 17th of May of 2017, and on this occasion, D275 was protesting on the netting. And if we begin, please, at page 78 of this transcript. At line 2787, you may remember a number of you were on the stairwell for quite a time. Do you remember, all kitted up in riot gear? And you say at 2787, right, so they will come through. We'll go out fucking, but anyway, so we can still see what's happening. You'll be stood behind them. Happy days. Do you remember who you were talking about? Was it Nationals or some other individual or
I
individuals?
think it may have been the Nationals, actually.
And Happy Days? What's Happy Days?
I think it's just a saying I use, just like, I don't know, just a saying I use.
Yeah, but what does it signify? Happy Days, something good or something bad?
Probably good, I suppose, if you know, it's black and white, yes.
So Tully says, okay, I'll come behind you three, yeah, so it's like a diamond really, you at the front, them two behind, then me behind them two. And then you say, but they've got him locked and walking forward, put him down and cuff him in a nice area, but it depends if he fucks about, he's going to get cuffed there, and then maybe, yeah, maybe I'll cuff him. Hey, I'll go kick the fucker out, you know. He's saying, oh, if you lay hands on, he's going to do this, do that, and the other. Well, there's not really much we can really do about it. Fuck it, fuck 'em. Christmas time, we can fucking buzz 'em.
Was it?
So, first of all, it's all a bit coarse language, isn't it?
Yes, it is, I'm afraid.
Why? What's the need for using all of that language? I mean, it's not really banter, is it? It's coarse language emphasising the use of force, isn't it? It's like pumping people up, isn't it?
It probably is, yeah.
And what was Christmas time? Was it the same as Happy Days? Same idea?
Yeah.
So a good thing. And do you accept, Mr. Connolly, when you look back at this kind of language, it creates a perception, doesn't it, amongst colleagues who looked up to you as one of the instructors, that use of force is a positive?
Yeah, it wasn't appropriate.
And so, for example, if we go back in this transcript at page 24, so to an earlier time, but during the same events, on page 24, at the top you see somebody's talking about the Nationals. And then at line 839 and 840, talking about something happening at 6:30 in the morning, fucking dogs and all. It's funny as fuck because they're all queued up outside of the building, nobody has to drive. And then at 8:45, you don't want them staying all the way. Got a feeling that Frontline will go on the top, kick the door open, flashbangs went in, stun grenades, fucking battering the fuck out of him. It's fucking brutal. And clearly you were talking about another event, because Tully says, is this the riot in 2009? And you say at 8:52, yeah, fucking brutal, funny as fuck. I got right down the something with some fucking Jamaicans, so I went to you coming down, and you covered your mouth to muffle your speech. Send the dogs in, fucking chewed him, call the dogs out, he was like moaning and groaning. I go like, are you coming out? Again, you covered your mouth. Send the dogs in again, got him out, central staircase across the top. Down the central staircase, happy days. that was sick. Dog handlers were fucking whipping dogs and fucking getting them mad. What was that all about?
Tall stories.
It was a tall story.
Yeah.
Everybody
Basi-
seems to want to tell tall stories, Mr. Connolly.
Well, with 5 hours sat in the stairwell, it was, yeah,
So wait, all of this was a fiction?
yeah,
The whole thing you made it up?
yes,
On the spot?
yes.
Dogs?
Yeah, it was stories I'd heard from what happened on the riots
Which riots?
when Brook House lost control, I think 2009.
Right. So it was based on fact, not fiction.
Fiction.
Well, you said there was a riot at Brook House in
Yes.
2009,
Yeah.
so that was a fact.
Yes, it was.
But you're saying you're making up a story around it, what, involving you in it?
Yeah.
And you're putting yourself in this story?
Yeah.
Is that what you're doing?
Yeah.
But why? Why is a grown man doing that?
Just passing the time of day. I know, but
Well, you can pass
Yeah.
the time of day by, playing a game of cards
you
or
could
something.
do. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But instead, you decide, you tell us, to fictionalise an account which is based on fact, but put you in it as perhaps the hero of the story.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. You don't think, though, if other officers believed what you were saying? Wait, if you don't think, do you, that if other officers didn't regard it as a tall story or a fictionalisation, but thought that this is John Connolly, an instructor, telling us the truth, that they would think glorifying violence is fine? That's what he's doing. If he can glorify violence, there's nothing wrong with it.
You could say that.
Yeah. So why were you doing it?
Boredom, probably. 5 hours sat in the stairwell. That's all I can put it down to.
You see what I'm saying?
I can do, yeah.
It leads to this
Percep-
contagion of toxicity within the establishment, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In your second witness statement, the man who was on the netting, you remember you referred to even in your witness statement as an idiot.
Yeah.
And you said he was an idiot because he was acting like one.
Yeah. In my mind.
In your mind, although he was vulnerable,
Yeah.
that didn't matter because he was an idiot.
I didn't know the full story because obviously I wasn't on that wing.
No.
So I was thrown into that and I didn't know his mental health, I didn't know his
No,
state of mind, I didn't know.
but this is now. You're still calling him an idiot. That's the point. This is in a witness statement you've made to this inquiry. That's my point.
Yeah.
And apart from this kind of, pumping up kind of language which you've accepted, Mr. Connolly, if we can look, please, at momentarily something entirely different. Go for you, Chair, tab 28.
Thank you.
If we can put up on screen INN 000013. This is a statement of a witness, Shane Munro. Do you remember Shane Munro?
No.
On page 18 and 19, start at 18, please, 1-8. Paragraph 57 at the bottom, she was asked, as many have been asked, whether she was aware of any homophobic or misogynistic attitudes or behaviours among staff. And she says at 57, I recall only one incident when I approached John Connolly, the use of force instructor, top of next page please, to speak to him about becoming a use of force instructor myself. Do you remember this?
No.
I'd enjoyed the training, and as I wanted to progress on to escorting, I believed that being a qualified use of force instructor would be a beneficial skill. John said something along the lines of, this was excellent because they didn't get many other swingers showing interest in becoming use of force instructors, so I'd be welcomed if I pursued it. Is that a term you use, Mr. Connolly? Other swingers?
I've never used that term in front of a lady. Full stop.
She said initially I didn't have a clue what he was referring to, when it was only later that day I realised he was referring to female breasts. She's got this from somewhere, hasn't she? She misidentified you, and is she thinking of somebody else?
I'm not sure, but I'll state that I never would use that term. Never.
I mean, whoever did use that language was being misogynistic.
Yes,
You agree with that?
I do agree.
We're going to go back to the 17th of May when you were formed up in these stairs for 5 hours, you say, with other officers. And I'm going to play to you a clip, which is KENCOV 1019 V 2017 05 17 00015 clip 4. And I hope the right time has been identified to you, Zainab. Has it been given to you? If it isn't, we can do things another way. I was hoping that somebody had given you a time for this clip I'm about to play. Let's see how we get on. Can you crank it up and we'll see if we can find it. Let's, right, just stop there for a moment, please. Can you just put it up when there is some subtitling up on the screen, please? Just run it forward a bit. Okay, just pause there. Just give me a moment. Yeah, that's fine. Can we, I'm going to take a punt on this. Can you sort of wind it forward by about 5 minutes, please? So take it up to about 15:40 on the timestamp on the left, right. Let me just play it until we get some subtitling. Well, that worked. Let's go a little further forward. See if you can identify just not too far on, but a bit more subtitle.
Oh, here they come. They're going to start kicking off, look.
All right, pause now. Now, if we can just go back, please. Go back to about 12. I think we'd probably find it. No, that's fine. Let's just have a look at that.
Any excuse to get kitted up so you can
So, John, just thinking, mate, if I'm number one and we don't need his head down, what am I doing? Just walking backwards in front, just walking backwards in front of him, if you know what I'm saying.
Pause there, please. I'm sorry, Chair. I thought, obviously wrongly, that this would be queued up.
No problem.
418 is what we need to go back to. So is it on this timestamp, on the left-hand bottom's timestamp? So 004. We think it's 00418. Let's try that. Thank you. No. Chair, I don't want to ask you to rise, but found it. There we are. It's bang on. Right. So it's 1419. Right. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to follow it in the transcript.
No problem. Thank
Right.
you.
Do you see there, Mr. Connolly, we have, and so Chair, if you're following it, it's on page 44 of the transcript, which is TRN 0000085, page 44, which is behind your tab 26.
Thank you.
I just want you to listen to the words, please, Mr. Connolly, and I expect that there'll be some subtitling along the way. You know what's coming. This is no surprise to you. Right, please.
Play it, but always figure of four, so it'll be cool.
Say, listen here, nigga. Listen to me. You can tell, nigga.
Now you've got nigger in your head, what are you saying?
Go back. I think the subtitling didn't follow the language. Let's just go back. That's it. There. Just go back a smidge, please, from that. Thank you. That's it.
Say, listen here, nigga. Listen to me. You can tell, nigga.
Now you've got nigger in your head, what are you saying?
I can guarantee you I won't be.
When you can rainbow then, after all that spray and everything, you'll cry yourself. Say, listen here, bitch. Doing some stupid ass stuff in the stomach, man. That was national grid, that's alright. Not free.
Pause there. Now, Mr. Connolly, do you accept that you used words that we see there, and you can look at the transcripts, it may be easier if we can put up on screen for a moment, because I wanted to play that to you. TRN 0000085 at page 44. Yeah, TRN 0000085, page 44. And it's the top half. And Callum Tully, I mean, there's this chat going on, and we can see at line 1471 where we managed to find that part of the clip. Tully saying, try and de-escalate it. Another male member says, yeah, but always figure of four, cool. And a figure of four is a reference to the formation of the group.
No, it's not.
What is it a reference to?
It's an arm. It's a de-escalation arm.
Arm, forgive me, it's right. And what does it describe, how you hold somebody?
Yes, it's the MMPR. If the detainee stood there,
Yeah,
then my left hand would be on his elbow,
yeah,
and my right hand would be on the top of his wrist,
right.
and you would guide the person that way.
You've reminded me, MMPR, Mr. Connolly, I asked you about that, and you were telling us about it in the training. So that we're clear, was MMPR a type of training that was used for adults or for children?
It was initially used for children. It replaced the PCC,
Yeah.
physical controlling care.
Yeah.
It replaced that package
Right,
because it dealt more on the medical side and the escalation
Yeah.
side. And because they thought it was a good idea, they'd integrate that into
right.
CNR.
So, and it wasn't just for Tinley House, it was Brook House as well?
Yes.
Okay. There was a diversion as you mentioned it. So figure of four you've explained. And as we see at 1474, just say, listen here, nigger, listen to me. And one of the other officers laughs, do what you're told, nigger. Which prompts male staff member 2 to say, now you've got nigger in your head, you'll probably say it. Tully, I fucking guarantee you I won't. Why'd you say that, Mr. Connolly?
If a detainee...
I mean, is there any excuse for it?
No, but if an officer's asking me figure of four, I'm not going to say, just say, listen here, nigger, listen to me.
So what are you trying to tell us?
It's like me walk into a chip shop and the guy says, what do you want? And I say, a pint of beer.
Yeah.
If an officer's asking me what technique to use,
Yeah.
and he says figure of four, and I go, just say, listen here, nigger.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, what you had to say about this, you'll remember in your second witness statement at paragraph 46. I never used racist language in front of detainees and certainly never ever encouraged others to do so. The footage of myself using the word nigger was, in my opinion, dubbed. I'll explain why. The alleged incident occurred outside of the lift in the secure corridor, the lift is directly opposite the director's office. The door to that office is always open, is 2 metres away from the lift. I wear hearing aids in both ears, and as a consequence I tend to shout. Tully was the number one of the team. He asked me outside of the lift, John, if he kicks off, should I take his head? It makes no sense whatsoever for me to have replied, just say, listen here, nigger. I would have said yes. If he gets non-compliant, take control of the head. And then you refer to this transcript. This is where the alleged foul language occurred. I look at the clip of me allegedly saying, listen here, nigger. At no point can you see my lip. This, in my opinion, was dubbed for dramatic effect. And then you add, both Small, that's Dan Small, and Tully stated that this happened in the stairwell. Well, did it happen in the lift or the stairwell? Are you really being serious, Mr. Connolly, that for reasons that no one can explain, the BBC somehow inserted and attributed to you the words, not once, listen here, nigger, because the word nigger, as we see on the transcript, appears twice attributed to you, and then it's repeated by a second man. Are you seriously suggesting that for reasons of their own, the BBC decided to put those words into your mouth? Is that what you're telling us?
The original BBC programme, if I remember correctly, that me saying just say listen here nigger was in the lift.
Oh, you think so? They've even changed the location, do you? Well, you're not right about that, Mr. Connolly. We can look at it again.
Okay.
But, it was always in the stairwell. And are you, so that when this day is over and you have left us, do you want the chair to remember your evidence to be that the BBC has deliberately put into your mouth the word nigger, not once but twice, for dramatic effect?
No, I most probably did, or most definitely did say that in the stairwell.
So you most probably did, or most definitely did?
Definitely did.
So why have you tried to deny it?
I'm not trying to deny it, but I watched that first programme over and over again.
Yeah.
And I watched the second panorama clip on the Inquiry's website, totally different.
Well, it
I
comes
may
from
be wrong, I may be trying to
wishful thinking,
convince
perhaps.
myself, I don't know.
Wishful thinking,
Yeah.
perhaps, Mr. Connolly, because it's...
Okay, I'll accept that, sir.
Believe you me, if there was another clip of you using that word, I'd let you know. This is the only one I know about.
Okay, sir.
And this comes, and this was shown, as I understand, is in the Panorama programme. So, so we are to understand that despite what you said in the witness statements from only the month before last, you are accepting that those were your words and that the BBC has not dubbed them in for dramatic effect. Is that what we understand now?
Yes, sir.
Right. Why did you use that word?
All I can say is we were talking about a range of topics. I don't know. I don't know. I haven't got an explanation for my...
No, because there is
Use
none,
the word.
really. I mean, there's certainly no excuse for it, is there?
No.
No. And once again, it's a window potentially into part of a culture at Brook House where everything went. I mean, if one's using language like this, anything goes almost, doesn't it?
You could perceive that, yeah.
If I'm not going to play this, but if we continue with the transcript, please, to page 77. If we were to look at the footage, do you remember a time when another member of staff, an imam called Zishan Qayyam, the head of religious affairs, do you remember him?
Yes, I do.
he turned up and was talking to you and the other officers in the stairwell.
Correct.
And if you look at line 2743 on this page, massage my arse now, right now that cunt's gone. Just forget figure of 4, go straight into locks. Right now that cunt's gone. What will happen is the Nationals will be behind you. They'll come up on that end. And if one was to look at the footage, the person to whom you were referring to as a cunt, who had just left, was the imam. Do you remember that?
I don't, but it's there, so yes.
And why were you referring to him as a cunt, and that now he had gone, what will happen is the Nationals will be behind you? What was the point? What were you trying to say?
I've got no excuse for that. None.
I mean, of course, the man was Muslim. Did that make a difference? Is that why he was a cunt?
No.
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 Certainly derogatory, wasn't it?
It would be.
Can we go back, please, to, in the transcript, to 54? Can we scroll it so that we've got the bottom half, please, Arnab? Yeah. At line 1872 on the transcripts, we've got you saying, it reads, if he fucks up everything, the suggestion is, actually what you were saying is if he fucks about, get him in there, fuck him up in the corner, mash him up in the corner. You can't find a rabbit in a corner. If we fuck up, he'll fucking split. And we've got to push him down with a stick on the side. What were you talking about there? No what?
No. Mash up I've never used, and can't find a rabbit in a corner, don't know what that's about.
Yeah.
And push him down with a stick on his side.
Yeah. Well, actually, if you view the footage, you see that you have some sort of stick object in your hand.
I don't.
No? So none of that means anything to you?
No.
And then if he refuses, we can shove him in there. And then at 1884, Dan Small, well, the fucker is going to come in there, bro, and the transcript, and bearing in mind that these transcripts were done by people who had no intimacy, as it were, with the footage, other than doing their best to transcribe, it says I'll just grab the cunt. And it's attributed to you when it should be attributed to Dan Small when it should be attributed to you. But one suggestion is, and this is a suggestion by Callum Tully, and is a combination of what he has had to say and what Dan Small has had to tell us, is that Small was so concerned about what you were saying that he wanted you to stop. And one way he tried to get you to stop saying what you were saying was to indicate or gesture up to a camera on the wall in the hope that you would pipe down. And what Tully remembers is your response to that was to say, I will just scrub, not grab, but scrub the cunt. In other words, delete it. Now, you know this because you've been told that this is the allegation. And what do you say about that, Mr. Connolly?
Right. I believe somebody said, look, boss, there's a camera up there. Everybody in Brook House called each other by the first names.
Yeah.
The only person, or the only people that called people boss were the detainees.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
Why would an experienced officer like Small point to a camera? All right, we know what he's trying to do to calm me down. Fine. Why would I say I'm going to scrub it when there is no way, technically, I could wipe CCTV footage? Wouldn't happen. Couldn't do it. So why would I say it?
Well, an answer to that is you're making him believe that you can. In other words, you're making somebody believe that you have got more capacity, ability than you actually do. To
They-
make him pipe down.
He worked in the control room,
Yeah.
so did Tully. They know that you can't walk into the control room, sit down behind the controllers, log on to the equipment,
Yeah.
and then try and scrub CCTV footage. It wouldn't happen. It doesn't happen. So I wouldn't say it.
Right. Let's just go to the next page before we look at the footage. At line 1909, Tully having asked why are we sticking him in there, and you say no, he's starting to have a little. If he's all right, just fucking walk him out, walk him down this way, throw him down the fucking stairs, go for it. You don't think you said that?
No.
Right. And then at 1927, because otherwise we've just got to fucking grab him, fucking throw him towards Dan, yeah. We fucking got him here, and another staffer says, and then gets his arms and pin him, and you say, I guess the fucker is trying to, or something to do it, and then male staff one says, yeah, are there cameras? So if that person is the same person as Dan Small, asking the same question, it doesn't matter. Fuck it, that's my justification. Fucking stairs, we can't be fighting him on top of the stairs. Now, did you accept saying those words?
I accept saying we can't fight him on the top of the stairs. I
Yeah.
accept that.
Right. And then Tully says, I can't see any cameras there, and you say there's two. It all lends itself, doesn't it, don't you think, Mr. Connolly, to a suggestion about how something was going to be covered up?
No.
You don't think so?
How can you cover it up when there's cameras there?
No.
Those stairwells are covered
Yeah.
all the way.
Yeah, but this seems to be the thrust of this conversation.
I wouldn't order another officer to throw a detainee downstairs.
Yeah. Shall we watch the footage? And you can, if you want, I'd rather you watched it than looked at the transcript. And it's almost certainly subtitled, so I'm fairly confident it's subtitled. And so you will see the words, but in the end it's your evidence, Mr. Connolly, we want. So we'll put up again Ken Cov 1019, but this time it's V 2017 0517 00016. And I'm going to ask for it to be started, I think at 13:20. Let's see if I've got the right timestamp. So let's start paying it perhaps at 13:0013. Just a little back from there, please. Just at 13 dead, please. Well, just pause there. Pause. You just go ever so slightly back to 13:20. What I'd like you to see, that's Dan Small with the helmet and the visor up.
Yep.
And he gestures up to the camera, which is on the wall, which you'll be able to see, and he says something along the lines of, there's a camera there, boss. This isn't in the transcript because it wasn't picked up.
No, I agree with that. I saw it.
Yeah, so let's just go back and then listen to yourself.
I'll just grab the cunt.
Pause there. I'll scrub the cunt.
Or did it say grab?
You think it's grab?
Yeah.
Right. So nothing to do with scrubbing a camera.
No.
That's how Callum Tully heard it, but you say it was grab, not scrub. What did you mean by grab the cunt?
Take hold of him.
Right. Let's just carry on, please. Just play it through to the bits I've been asking you about then.
Can't talk about it. his fucking chest.
Put the time.
Love it. That's my bum.
That's our justification, right, for shoving him in there. These stairs. Yeah. That's our justification for fucking throwing him in that corner and fucking dealing with him in that fucking corner, yeah?
Cool.
Going down there, do you?
No.
Messy.
Yeah, so in fact we'll fucking have him there, just walk it on. Yeah. Yeah, just move down the bottom there.
But John, what's your...
Fucking that's where I walk.
Give me some stupid. Why are we sticking
Can't you
him?
stand there as well, mate?
Why are we sticking him in there?
No, you stand there and then he's alright, we'll just fucking walk him out. Walk him down this way. And then down the fucking stairs. You just go forward.
Force here.
Yeah.
Move forward and side.
So all we're doing is just got him here, fucking walk all the way round. Till fucking Dan's there.
And down, take the lead down.
And Dan takes the way downstairs. Do the lead first. So
I'll be going behind with
you
just
wait
kicking him
there
up.
until Dan fucking gets onto the stairs.
Cool, yeah, and then I'll ease down with him.
But don't do anything until
He's there.
he's there.
Don't worry.
Because otherwise we just got to fucking grab him, fucking throw him to one stand and fucking get used to it and fucking do him.
Leg near, got his arms.
Just got to match on this and do it.
The cameras.
Yes, it doesn't matter. Fuck it, that's my justification. Fucking stairs. Can't be fighting on the top of the stairs.
No.
Can you?
No.
I can't see any cameras, Pat.
Well, you can't.
Right. First of all, if you want to consult the transcript, let's get that back up, although we have to bear in mind that parts of it may not be accurate. But if we put up the transcript, page 54, first of all, right at the bottom, that's our justification, right, 1893. We shove him in there, these stairs. Presumably you heard that, Mr. Connolly.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that's our justification? What was your justification?
If he started to become refractory on the top of the stairs, then we'd have to put him against the side of the wall
Yeah.
and walk him down the stairs with his back to the wall, sideways, one officer on the bottom, pinning his arm, one officer on the top, and one officer on the front. That would be Tully on
Yeah.
the front. So there'd be 3 officers surrounding him, walking him down the stairs.
Yeah. 1895, that's our justification. We fucking throw him in that corner. You fucking deal with me. No fucking corner, eh? Do you accept saying those words? Right at the bottom of page 54.
Well, it's there in black and white, so yeah.
And then on 55, at lines 1909 and 1910, in particular, throw him down the fucking stairs, go for it. Do you accept you said that?
No,
You don't accept that.
no, I don't.
Do you accept at 1927? You said because otherwise we've just got to fucking grab him, fucking throw him towards Dan. You surely heard that.
Just got honestly can't remember. Honestly can't remember.
And then at 1930 we fucking got him here. And then you heard male staff 1, who appears to be Dan Small, I think. Yeah, are there cameras? It doesn't matter, fuck it, that's my justification. Fucking stairs, we can't be fighting him on the top of the stairs. You heard that, presumably.
It's there, I must have said it.
Yeah. It all sounds as if, you know, everybody's getting G'd up to become involved in a use of force against this man. And you're using the kind of language that, do you accept, as I said earlier, is like pumping everybody up.
when you're dealing with a situation like that, you don't know what's behind that door. You can't have people, it's a nice day today, wonder what's behind the door. You've got to get the person in a mindset, I'm afraid, and I'm not making any excuses. You've got to get a person in, you've got to get officers in a mindset so they're on it, they can control that person straight away and then start to de-escalate. Not throw them down the stairs, walk them down the stairs.
But these are the words I suggest the footage shows that you used. And do you think that these words are escalating rather than de-escalating?
Escalating.
Escalating. They're riling people to become involved in a use of force from which it's very difficult to de-escalate, don't you think?
No. Once the initial contact was made, then you start to de-escalate. Don't forget, the Nationals would have been there as well, so how could I have thrown someone down the stairs when there's actually prison service staff there, or would be there?
But this is the problem, Mr. Connolly. It's not so much what you did do, it's what you say you're going to do.
Yeah, I agree.
And for instance, from Daniel Small's point of view, as he said, you know, he was part of this restraint team. He was not, he said in a witness statement and effectively repeated in his evidence, he was not happy to carry out the actions which he understood you were telling him about or instructing him. And he said that Brook House was not an environment in which you could directly challenge a more senior officer without being labelled a grass. And that's a reference, for the record, to his statement, BDP 00003, page 15, paragraph 45. And he said, under the pressure of the situation, my reaction was to indicate to DCO Connolly that there was a camera above him in the hope that he would stop talking and abandon his plan to attack the detainee. That's how he took it, if he was being accurate, truthful and reliable. That's what he said.
Well, the camera wouldn't have stopped me talking because the camera is just visual, not audio.
No.
So that wouldn't have stopped me talking.
No, but
And as for being a senior officer,
yeah.
no, it's exactly the same as Dan Small.
Yeah.
Might have had more years' experience, but
But he was worried, or part of his worry was a camera would show them being asked to attack a detainee in the stairwell. That's what his worry was. You don't accept it?
no.
Finally, this, as far as I'm concerned, in view of the time, in your first witness statement at paragraph 42, you said you felt you'd been stitched up by the BBC programme. How did you feel, I don't know if you still feel it, Mr. Connolly, but at the time you made the statement, how did you feel they'd stitched you up?
It's probably, I don't know. Being here now and answering the questions, listening to the questions posed to me, yeah, it was probably just hopefulness.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, you also said you knew you'd been thrown under the bus by G4S. Do you still feel you personally have been thrown under a bus?
No.
No. That's all I'm going to ask, Chair. Chair may have some questions for you.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. You've been with us for a long afternoon, so I will keep it brief, but I do have one or two questions for you.
Sure.
You talked about the practice of debriefing after use of force, people writing up their reports. I think, if I've remembered correctly, that you said it could take 60 to 90 minutes for people to reflect on the use of force and to then make their notes. Do you, from memory, did that happen in practice at Brook House? Did people have that amount of time to actually...
Yes, he did, and myself and the other instructors tried to ensure that happened, but some of the Oscar ones used to put pressure on us because initially you'd take 4 officers out of the system, and they'd be sat there. People think they'd be doing nothing, but obviously they'd have to calm right down first, get the adrenaline out of the system before they could start writing a statement of assault.
And am I understanding correctly that so if 4 officers were taken off the units because a planned use of force was going to be carried out, there's nobody to backfill those positions? It means that there are gaps, so to speak.
I
Where
think
those
it's
officers would have
robbing
been.
Peter to pay Paul that I think they used to take, if they had them, officers from Tinsley who were very reluctant to go to Brook House, but I think that's what happens sometimes.
You started at Tinsley, you told us, and
Yes.
then moved to Brook House. Were they different environments, Tinsley and Brook House?
Chalk and cheese, yeah. Tinsley House was a nice sort of a residential unit. It was an old hotel that had been turned into a detention centre. So there was no purpose-built gates. The gates were put onto it. And then when you moved to Brook House, all intents and purposes, it was a Cat C, Cat D prison. It had that feeling. When detainees came from prisons, they felt they weren't going to a detention centre, they were going to another prison.
Other than the physical environment, were there any other differences between Brook House and Tinsley in your experience?
Might sound silly, but the atmosphere. It was a totally different atmosphere.
In what respect?
Tinsley was laughing a joke. You could actually sit down and talk to a detainee for 2 or 3 hours if you wanted to, because the ratio was about 22 officers on a shift looking after 100, 130 detainees. At Brook House you might have 3 officers looking after a wing of 90 with ACDCs to manage, and yeah.
Thank you. You also told us about the ITC, so the initial training course that recruits would undertake, and you talked about the CNR aspect of it, and that if recruits didn't pass that element of it, that they couldn't then have a detainee-facing role. You might not be able to remember, so, and don't worry if you can't. Can you remember at what point of the training course, the ITC course, people would carry out the CNR aspect of the training?
It all depended, with like poor relations, it all depended what other outside agencies they could fit in. If they had someone from Gatwick coming down to chat, or they had someone from, I don't know, another agency. So it could have been the first week of ITC, or it could have been the 6th week. It was that sort of.
So there wasn't a rigid formula that was the end of the course or the beginning,
No.
the middle. Okay. Are you aware of any other elements of the ITC that if a recruit didn't pass, that they couldn't then progress onto a role that was detainee facing, or was it just the CNR?
No, I think it was just pass or fail on CNR.
Okay, thank you very much. One final question. You talked about that you started a database on who was actually carrying out the use of force. Can you tell me a bit about that? Why did you start that database? What was the reason for it?
When I was reading the reports, obviously on the front cover it'd have the officers involved.
Mm-hmm.
So as a matter of, well, after about 6 months I got a spreadsheet up and I was putting the officers who were involved on that day on the spreadsheet. Mm-hmm. So again the next day, or it might have been 3 or 4 a day, I don't know, but I was putting them on, and then I was highlighting in red those that hadn't. And some officers had been there 4 or 5 years and had never, ever been involved in a control and restraint.
Did you have concerns about that?
I did, because I mentioned it to the DCMs. I said they're all trained the same, be they female or male.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it was better to have an all-female team going in, because some of the detainees, some of the nationalities respected women more than others. So if you could sort of play that hand by getting females in, that would de-escalate it. But the DCOs or the DCMs, they didn't want it to look bad on them that a CNR had gone wrong, so they'd pick the strongest guys.
Okay. Did you share that database with anybody within management?
No, it was just my own personal.
Was anybody aware of it from your knowledge?
I don't think so. No,
Okay.
no, it's just my own personal.
For your information. Those are all the questions that I have for you, Miss Connolly. I'm very grateful for you coming. You've been with us a long afternoon, as I say. Thank you. I understand it's not an easy experience. Thank you for your evidence.
Thank you. 10 o'clock tomorrow, Chair, please. Start, all things being equal, Charlie Francis.
Thank you very much. See you tomorrow at 10. Thank you.